What's happening, everybody? Welcome to this Tuesday morning edition of Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm your host, Dan Besbris, and today we are joined by the Ball Boys man himself, Mitch Casey, Ball Boys Fantasy. We're going to get him in here in about 20 seconds or so. First, quickly, follow me on social at Dan Besbris, at Old Man Squad. You can follow Old Man Squad Fantasy on Instagram. That has our shorts going out. Like, rate, subscribe, all that important stuff. You guys know the drill at this point. But it's been too freaking long. Again, entirely my fault. I know I've said that like 30 times. I think at this point we've had like, it's probably not quite that many times, but we're getting all the guests back. I'm getting the gang back together. And so, Mitch, as I've said to everyone, first of all, I have two things. Number one, hello. And number two, I'm so sorry that it took so long to get you back on a Dan podcast, but I'm also very excited to have you back. What's going on, dude? How you been?
I'm good, mate. No stress at all. Happy to be here. Happy to talk hoops with anybody when I can fit it in. And we're going to talk about some of my guys that I'm pretty excited about in today's show. So looking forward to it.
I am happy to be that anyone today. Or I think you said anybody. I biffed it. I made a joke and I screwed it up. Mitch has 6 names we're going to go over on today's show. 2 from the early parts, 2 from the middle, 2 from the later parts of drafts right now. And so I'm going to Mitch at Ball Boys Fantasy, by the way, on social. You can check out his show. It's available on YouTube. I will make sure to put the links in the show description so folks can get that if they check it out after. And also, we will find out some of the things that you got floating around over there as well midway through. But Mitch, where do you want to start? Where do you want to go first on today's show?
All right, well, let's start. And for most of these guys, I am considering category leagues. That's usually my area of expertise and niche. But I think some of them could also apply to points leagues. But the first guy I've got on the list here is an old man. I just thought I'd start with an old man with the name of the podcast. I'm starting with Paul George as a player that I think is really good value this year. And the other thing with some of these guys, I reference some of the ADPs and stuff like that, but I know when I go into a draft, when I'm versing a lot of people who know what they're talking about, you might see someone like a Fred VanVleet and his ADP is like 30 something. He's not going into 30s in most of the drafts that I'm in. So I'm trying to pick players that have the ADP that I think are later, but also players that I see in my mocks and drafts that I do are still also actually going later than I would. So Paul George is one of those guys. He obviously has the uncertainty of changing teams this year. He's a guy who has had injury issues in the past. And I think that stigma or that has kind of followed him across the last couple of years. And he did have a very healthy season last year. Now, that does not mean that he's guaranteed to have a healthy season this year. But the thing I like about Paul George is that his injuries, different to someone like a Kawhi Leonard and a Joel Embiid, have been very isolated incidences. Like he's had, obviously, had the broken leg. He's had some elbow things. He's had, I think he had a shoulder thing at one point. So a lot of different, rolled his ankle, I think, at certain times. It's a lot of bad luck in there, but it's not like he's had multiple surgeries on the same knee. So for me, I think the injury stigma around Paul George often goes a bit too far. And I'm not too concerned about how he fits on a 76ers team because he was already playing in a team with Kawhi Leonard and James Harden. He's been like the second/third wheel in a team before and put up basically first or second round value for multiple years. So I think he can definitely do that again this year. So he's a guy that I'm getting in a lot of spots.
What kind of buffer do you think you have with Paul George at 30? Like, I assume that there's probably going to be some sort of peel back. He was around 17 shots and 4 free throws last year. Is that a number you think comes down a little, but not as much as people are expecting it to?
Yeah, look, I think he can basically do very similar to what he did last year. I actually think the assists can go up. He's no longer playing next to James Harden. He's playing against next to Tyrese Maxey, who's a point guard, but not a James Harden level point guard. So any shots that you kind of expect to drop away, I think can be made up with the assists. He's also a guy that is a really good steals player, and that has been the same for every basically season he's played. So those kind of things float his value. Going at 30, I'd be very happy taking him depending on your build, sort of end of the second, start of the third round. So those early 20s, I think, is a perfect spot for him. It doesn't sound like much, but early on in the draft, if I'm happy to take a player 10 spots higher than where they're ranked, that's a lot of value. That's a big upside at that point, because you can't get much more.
Yeah, you can't go any farther. You can only go so far. You actually answered the follow-up question I was going to ask, which was how early are you willing to go on him? And you put it out there. But you're absolutely right. Like, what can you get? If you get 2-3 rank slots at that point, that's a win. And frankly, like, I would argue for a lot of guys in the top like 20, and I know PG's back at 30, but if you just get even money on players at that point, it's basically a win. Like, just don't detonate your team in the first 2 rounds and you're in good shape, right?
Yeah. And Philadelphia actually have a great playoff schedule for a lot of the default leagues out there. And I know a lot of analysts are sort of suggesting, that March 23rd is sort of the one. I think the Philadelphia play 12 games, so 4-4-4 across all those playoff weeks, which is really, really nice. And I think, like, consider if you're the team that started with a Nikola Jokic, I think a Paul George would be an excellent player to get off the ground and maybe lean into a bit of a punt blocks build, because he gives you the high volume threes that you need. He gives you the steals. He gives you the excellent free throw percentage, the scoring solid. So if you can get him on a team like that, or even a Wemby team, and you want to lean a bit more into the punt field goal percentage, either way, I think he suits those top end starting pieces very, very nicely.
I don't mean to spend too much time on Paul George, but I have more of a broad question that's about his situation. Mitch, how do you typically handicap when a player moves to a new team like this? And like, how are you able to figure out when guys are falling too far? Is it about fit? Is it about like how they accrue their fantasy stats? Is it case by case? I'm always interested in kind of understanding what makes people tick.
It's more doable, I think, with a player like Paul George, who we've seen on multiple different teams. So we've got evidence to suggest that he is a bit of a chameleon, and he can kind of, fit in amongst these other stars fairly seamlessly and maintain his value no matter what. Say he was a point guard and he was going to a team that had another point guard like player, you would feel more comfortable, or you'd feel safer putting them down the rankings a little bit. But for someone like Paul George, who's multi-positional, he can play the 2, 3, 4. His game isn't predicated on him getting huge volumes in assists or, being a sky-high usage player. He does bits of everything. For a player like that, I am much more confident in him maintaining the value no matter the situation. Similar players like a Kevin Durant or these other sort of type of guys where their value is more even spread. I feel more confident that it's not going to fall off a cliff, as opposed to maybe those point guards and centers. I think you got to be a little bit more cautious on when they have a slight change in team or situation.
BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. I know, basketball soon. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on a $200,000 mega contest by picking 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on down to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. BetOnline. The game starts here. Mitch, where would you like to go next?
I'm going to go young now. I've done the old man. I've done the token old man.
Yeah, thank you. I'm satisfied. You may go where you like now.
I'm going to go with a guy that I was big on last year. Maybe I was a year too early, although he did well. And I'm going with a guy who really is, I think, one of the faces of my brand and a player that I want to attach my name to, and that's Evan Mobley from Cleveland. I think this guy is a very, very good player. I think that he started so well in his rookie season that the apparent disappointment with Mobley just comes from the fact that because he was such a good rookie and he hasn't hit like first or second round value yet, people kind of get a little bit impatient. But this is a guy that is a player that he gives you really solid percentages. The free throw percentages were poor, but last year got a lot better. And I think a lot of the times when you're drafting players who are shot blockers, you have to give up something, right? You've got to concede either they don't score, they don't assist, they don't steal, or all three of them. They either have terrible free throw percentage or don't hit threes. Think of your Rudy Goberts, think of your Yucca Pirtles, those sort of types. Mobley, you don't have to do that. he gives you the blocks, but he also gives you, 16 to 18 points a night, which is better than a lot of those other guys. He gives you the 3+ assists. He gives you nearly a steal per game or a steal per game. The free throw percentage is not to the point where you have to really worry about it too much. And I think that there's some untapped potential, particularly with a new coach coming into the situation. There's already been a lot of talk about, he's compared him to Wemby at certain times, which might be a step too far, but just the fact that the coach is singing him praises like that, and there's a lot of talk about more usage coming his way, I think this could be the year, his 4th year in the NBA, where he could potentially see the breakout that pushes him into that second round.
That was actually, you're hitting my follow-up questions before I can even ask them. So, it seems like in drafts right now, you can generally get Mobley at the end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th. Is that where you're looking for him typically?
Yeah, I would love to get him in the 4th round. If he fits what I need, like, for example, I'm doing a slow draft right now, and I just picked him in the 3rd round at pick 30. I was very happy and comfortable to get him there. I think Paul George went the pick before him, so I would have gone Paul George ahead, but Mobley was the next guy on the list, and he's ranked at 38th on Yahoo, which is that 4th round value. And I don't think, because, I don't know, people have been calling for a breakout year after year. It's like that boy who cried wolf kind of thing. It's like, yeah. We heard the analysts talk about Mobley all before, but I think, I believe it's going to happen at some point, whether it's this year or not sure. The situation isn't different, aside from the coach is the only sort of hesitancy I have. But even at that spot, I think you're at least breaking even. And he just has that fantasy shape, the Chet Holmgren kind of type of game that you could really see do well in fantasy.
Yeah, you mentioned the safe floor. That might be my favorite thing about Mobley, is that you just know, like, if he's out there and he's playing decent minutes, he's going to do a bunch of different things. And, like, even if he ends up just being even money, even if you just take him in the late 30s and he ends up around the late 30s, that's still fine, because he's special at a few spots. And if there's a little bit more, awesome, even better. I'm glad you brought him up, because he isn't really a player I've talked about all that much on this show, frankly, because I think he really is just sort of like a safe late 3rd, early 4th kind of guy. Like, if he gets better, great. If it's worse, it's not going to be my much. So there's a lot to like there. And again, just not missing has such value in fantasy, especially for a guy that is still young and could conceivably continue to get better. Mitch, what do you got? What are you working on these days before we get to your other 4?
What have I got working on these days? Popping out a bunch of content. We've just done our breakout video. More recently, I went through the top 10 players that I think could have a substantial rise in value this year. Now, that was not taking into account ADP. I will be going through my sleepers or undervalued players soon. And the next video that's going to be coming out is a topic which I know I've heard you talk about and Josh talk about, maybe as a slightly overrated topic, but I like to talk about it anyway, is the 1st and 2nd round pairings to get your team started off right. So that should be coming out probably tomorrow by the time this video comes out. So stay tuned for that one.
What's funny, Mitch, is I didn't even intend on doing that show, and just a bunch of people yelled at me until I did it. But it is a very popular topic, even if I tend to mostly go with just whoever the hell I want in the second round. Again, the YouTube that he's talking about is Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball, youtube.com/Ball Fantasy Basketball, where you can get all of Mitch's content. Player number 3, who's next on the list?
So we're going to move down the ADP order a little bit here to actually a teammate of Evan Mobley in Darius Garland. Is a guy that I like for a bounce back this season. Not really young, or not really old, but not really young either. But he is someone that for years was drafted very early. I think at times he might have even been approaching 2nd round kind of areas where we would draft Darius Garland, but had a really bad season last year. There's no denying that. He, I think, in a 9 category sense, was ranked out the top 100. I have some issues with how that actually represents his value, but saw basically a drop off across the board, and it wasn't for any particular reason either. Like, he had put up a top 50 season playing next to Donovan Mitchell the year before. Like, it's not like that was different. He had a few injuries, only managed the 57 games. Minutes came back, a couple of minutes per game compared to the other seasons. I just think that he wasn't quite right last year. And for a player that can give you upwards of 8 assists per game, if you can get him in, I think he's ranked sort of like the 60s or something like that. A player who can give you close to 8 assists per game, give you nearly 20 points per game, solid free throw percentage, can get you over a steal per game. I think that's just super valuable. His ranking is always going to be down-weighted because of his lack of blocks, rebounds, field goal percentage, but that's pretty typical for a point guard. And if you've looked after that to that point, I don't think it's unrecoverable from. And if anything should happen to someone like a Donovan Mitchell at any point, which didn't last year, you can see some serious uptick in value. But I'm sort of just more banking on the fact that he's going to return back to 2022, 23 Garland, which was a top 50 player, potentially even a top 40 player. And those assists are so valuable at that point in the draft. They're so hard to come by. So I like getting him.
Garland's a really interesting one, too, because he's sort of like the last of that type of player. I feel like everybody that goes to the draft is like, well, if I don't get Darius Garland, well, then there's just like no scoring point guards left. But to your point, in 8-Cat last year, he was number 61 in what I think we can all agree was kind of a crap season. Like the fact that he's being drafted now around where he finished in 8-Cat last year is kind of surprising. I thought he'd still go sooner, even after the clunky year. But you can get him at a decent clip there. And for my teams, you know me, Mitch, I end up with a lot of old guys. I end up with guys that are sort of high assist to turnover dudes, which means you can actually kind of absorb his turnovers midway through, even if you're playing 9-Cat. He's another one where you're just like, even if everything goes wrong, which I think you could argue it did last year, he's still valuable in 9-Cat. You just have to find a way to not care as much or buffer against the high turnovers. But if everything comes back and he's, 60 or better range in 9-Cat, well, then in 8-Cat, you're talking about a guy that could be top 40 or better. So he's an interesting case study in team building. Are you leaning into the turnover punt? Are you creating a lower turnover team where then you bring your turnovers in a little bit later with Garland? How do you think through that part of that? This wasn't my intention to ask you this type of follow-up, but then it just hit me as I was monologuing about it. How do you deal with the turnover situation in 9-Cat? Do you mostly just ignore it?
I don't go for a default ignore. I used to in the past. I used to be sort of the type of person that would just view it as an 8-category league. I'm very happy to punt the category, but it really will depend on my first 2 or 3 picks. And sometimes I'll even just give it like a 50% weighting or something like that. So because there's no point being so far ahead of every team in turnovers. Like it's not, you don't get more points for being so much better. So if I'm doing well, I can take a player like this and it hurts my turnovers, but really boost my assists up to sort of top 3 or 4, then I'm happy to do that. The other thing with like the Cavs guys, I think, like I mentioned with Mobley, the change in coach will, I believe, could potentially massively improve their pace of play, which I think for someone like Garland would be pretty good. They were one of the slowest teams last year when it came to pace. And I think Garland suffered because of that. Now it might lead to more turnovers, but I think that freedom of pace will suit a player like that. And, the year before in 2 more minutes per game, he averaged less than 3 turnovers a game.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always sort of go the way you would expect. So I do see that room to improve there.
Yeah,
as well.
he was just never really right last season, which generally creates a little bit of kind of like a post-type sort of window. Talking to Mitch Casey, Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball. Mitch, who is player number 4?
Player number 4 is not an old man, but I think he fits the category, although there is a little bit of hype on this one by analysts, less so I'd imagine by general public, but it's Isaiah Hartenstein.
Oh, I love this one so much.
Yeah, so he's a guy that I've heard some differing opinions out there, whether or not he's going to start or whether he's not. I personally don't think it matters. I think if he starts, great. If he doesn't, I don't care. I think that the Thunder are one of the smartest organizations in the comp. And I think they're going to put their best players out there. And Isaiah Hartenstein is, I believe, one of their best players. We saw in stretches last year when he was starting over when Mitch Robinson was out. This guy's just a per-minute beast. He's not going to score much. He won't shoot any threes, but the rebounds, the assists from a center, the steals, the blocks, the field goal percentage, the solid free throw percentage from a big man, it's all there. And I, like you, Dan, share the enthusiasm with punting points in a lot of my teams. And he's perfect for that kind of a build. He's ranked on, I think he's in the 70s, I want to say, in Yahoo. am I just, 71 ranked on Yahoo. I could easily see this guy being a top 50 player. It kind of comes down to the minutes. If he's 25 minutes, maybe he's around the 60 mark. If he's 28, 29 minutes, he could be in the 40s. And he could do that all while averaging 10 points per game. It's all the other stuff that he brings that I think is going to be really, really valuable. So I'm a big fan of Isaiah Hartenstein.
I can't play devil's advocate on this one at all. I freaking love Isaiah Hartenstein. He is fantastic. The fact that he can be like a top 75 or better 9-cap player, even if you're not punting points while scoring 9 points a game, tells you how unbelievable he is in rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, not hurting your free throw that much while being a solid field goal guy. Oh, I'm over the moon for Hartenstein. I have nowhere to argue with you. And looking at last year, like, again, I know that it's a goofy way to look at it, but if you were punting points last season, that stretch he went on in the middle of the year when he was the full-time starter before he had some injuries, they had his minutes kind of held in check. He was a first rounder in punt points builds for that stretch. So I have nothing to add other than to say I fully agree. I'm going to be fighting you and others for Hartenstein. And as early as he keeps getting pushed on boards, I still am probably willing to go earlier on him. I'm part of the hype train and I need to shut my mouth, but whatever.
And the thing is, like, different drafts, like he does go early in some of the analyst drafts and stuff that I do. But when you get into your drafting with your league mates, like Isaiah Hartenstein, he's not a sexy name. Like, you draft a player who averaged 8 points per game, people aren't going to be like, ooh, Hartenstein. It's like he just falls. And I think you're going to get good value. But if you are maybe a bit, I don't want to draft someone who averaged 8 points, I think the score can go up this year. Like, he played for Tibbs, who notoriously gives his centers like 6% usage. And I don't think the Thunder are going to do that. So I can see him, scoring maybe closer to 11, 12, 13 points per game, which only then further helps his field goal percentage impact as well. So
he's a glorious one. We don't have to go too far down the Hartenstein one just because I think we both know how much we love that dude. Let's go to player number 5. Now we're moving towards the later part of the list. Yeah.
So these are guys that may or may not have appeared on my breakout video, but you can get quite late, right? So the first guy, and this is probably my biggest swing guy, because there's every chance you drop this player, but especially in a roto format or in any format where you have the ability to stash at all, I am absolutely making sure I don't leave without this player going undrafted. And it's Amen Thompson from the Houston Rockets. I was a massive believer in him coming into the draft. He fits the Mitch Casey type of player, which is the player who can pass, the player who can defend, but the player who can't shoot. It just seems to be the guy that I like. I don't know. It seems to be the guys I gravitate towards, maybe because that's how I played. But it's the rebounding from a guard position, the steals are elite, the blocks from a guard, the assists are awesome. The field goal percentage from a rookie point guard to average 55% from the field is unheard of, really. I mean, think about how bad Scoot Henderson was last year. Now, obviously, he didn't have the same role or usage that Scoot did, but he's still coming in as one of the more inexperienced players, only playing in the overtime elite kind of thing. So he's someone that I think could see a massive jump, and I'm just kind of banking on his talent winning through in Houston. I'm down on someone like a Jalen Green. Dylan Brooks is not really someone I'd be too concerned about him finding a way to get minutes over. And if he played 25 minutes a night, I think he has a chance to be a top 100 player. So, and if he earns full-time starters minutes at any point, look out. I think this guy's got really, really high upside.
Talking to Mitch Casey at Ball Boys Fantasy, where do you think his minutes start this season?
If I had to project where he starts, I do think he comes off the bench to start the year. But this is the kind of like this guy for me last year was Jalen Johnson. Like, it was the guy where you sort of go, I don't expect him to start, but if he does, and if he does get the minutes, look out. And it took 3 games for Jalen Johnson to kind of get rolling last year. I'm less confident that will happen with the men because Houston does have a lot of other talented pieces. But in my eyes, I think he's the number one most important player for Houston moving forward. It's probably him and Şengün that are like their pieces I think they're building around. And so it could have come at Dylan Brooks' expense. I think that's probably the main piece. Could it come at Jalen Green's expense? I mean, I think it should. I don't know if Houston will do that themselves, but I've seen crazy things happen. So, and he's the kind of guy that plugs in. Like, I think Şengün was injured last year, and he got the benefit. So it doesn't take someone specific like a guard to get injured or anything like that. Anybody in that team goes out, and he's the guy that slots in because he is so versatile. So, yeah, like I said, if I can stash, I'm much more inclined to draft him even a bit earlier.
I love that last point you made. He is like Al Horford was that guy on the Celtics last year. A couple teams had the guy where like if anybody was out, they dropped into that spot. And that's very much the case with Amen Thompson because dude was basically, I mean, Jabari Smith Jr. I think was technically listed as the center, but you could argue that Amen played some center minutes when Şengün was out. And we saw it already. He doesn't need full starters minutes to post fantasy value. He was basically like a top 60 guy down the stretch last year with starters minutes, but he was inside the top 100 in like 25 minutes a game because, as you pointed out, good field goal percent, great steals, great rebounding, good assists. He's not going to score a ton on that team. They have a bunch of other guys that are more competent shooters. Maybe the free throw percent comes along a little bit. That would be sort of a cherry on top. But I think he's a great swing guy at the end of drafts because of that opportunity to make a big leap forward. Fully on board with this one as well. And again, I don't give a crap if he doesn't score because I end up punting points most of the time anyway. Mitch, last one. You had 6 for us, and I want to make sure I'm trying to keep us on schedule. I have all these follow-up questions that I'm not asking, but I'll bug you probably the next time you're on the show. So who's player number 6? Let's round it out.
Probably blabbering on a little bit. The last guy is a fellow Aussie of mine. Dyson Daniels is the last.
Yes, I love it.
Kind of similar vein to Amen Thompson. Kind of similar shape of player. I think his opportunity is a little bit clearer. But I think his overall ceiling is maybe a bit less than Amen. So maybe if you want to take a punt on someone that's more likely to get that allotment of minutes, but maybe less likely to do as much with it. The issue I just find with him is the shooting and how he fits around a lot of those other Hawk starters, but same kind of shape of player, good rebounds, good assists, good steals, won't score, won't shoot threes, but the stuff he does do is really valuable. So he's another kind of guy that you can get very late. But he does go, again, he goes a little bit earlier in some of the drafts where me, Kingy, and Josh Lloyd and
battling your countrymen for Dyson Daniels. Yeah, it's going to be impossible to get him over Kingy. It's just not happening. You have to just accept that Adam King is getting Dyson Daniels. But if you're in a regular draft, I think his pre-rank is 164. Like he's not even way back. He's not even in a traditional Yahoo 13-round draft right now. He's literally off the table. But I'm with you. And I was just talking about him on a show that I think dropped last night on my channel because he had that it was like a 9-game window, I think, when CJ McCollum was out last year. And he was putting up close to 2 steals a game. And he had good rebounding numbers and good assist numbers. But his rank was artificially deflated because during those 2 weeks, I don't know why, he shot like 32% from the field or something god-awful. And I get it. He's not a great shooter, but he's not 32%. This guy's still in the NBA. So if that number were to have leveled off, he would have been a top 100 guy during that stretch. And it kind of feels like that's a role that he could find himself in for this Hawks team that, again, they're not going to ask him to score, but they do have a little bit of a lack of scoring with DeJounte Murray gone. But he's going to need to do the other stuff because Trae Young ain't guarding anybody and Bogdan Bogdanovic isn't guarding anybody. There's opportunity there for Daniels, and he's actually one of my favorite last round flyers. So I'm glad you brought him up. How many minutes, Mitch, do you think we could potentially look for out of Dyson this year? Because I'm thinking 30 might be a stretch, but high 20s feels attainable.
I think high 20s. I would say anywhere between 26 and 29 is where I'd expect. I think because they want to keep Bogdan Bogdanovic in that 6-man kind of role. So he's kind of starting in place of him. It'll come down to the shooting and the spacing on that team because you've got Jalen Johnson can shoot it a bit, but not the best. Trae Young can obviously shoot it, but he's got the ball in his hand, so you want to surround him with shooters. You've got Okongwu started taking some threes last year, but he's not a spacer. So it just comes a fit kind of thing, which may just limit his playing time, which is why I don't think he quite has the ceiling that Amen does if things were to go their way. But I do think, as of right now, I am projecting him to start, but it might be like a 27-minute-a-night starter as opposed to like a 32-minute-a-night starter.
Yeah, and steals are actually weirdly hard to come by late in drafts this year. You've got like 3 guys going around 100, which is like OG, Caruso, and Herb Jones. And then you got Marcus Smart at like 120 something and Dyson Daniels super duper late. But otherwise, the steals are actually pretty well clustered in the first 2 to 3 rounds. So it's kind of nice to have a guy like Daniels way the hell down the board to take a shot at the very end of drafts. Quick recap, by the way. I was trying to write them down as we went, and then I forgot to write down the last couple. Mitch, who were the 6 one more time?
So Mitch is my guys. Paul George, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, Isaiah Hartenstein, Amen Thompson, and Dyson Daniels are the guys that I'm going to attach my name to.
Love it. And as you mentioned, and by the way, this is the hardest thing to do for an analyst, is to try to separate the pre-rank from the ADP from the reality of where these guys are actually going. Because like Paul George, ADP around 30, actually does tend to go pretty close to 30. Whereas, you know, a guy like, and as much as we all loved him, Jalen Williams, he had an ADP of like 41 for a while. But every analyst draft, he was going to like 28. You had no shot. You're not getting him at 40. Weird thing, by the way, I noticed that in Yahoo, when I just parachute into a Yahoo mock, Jalen Johnson now is going like early 4th round. I don't know. That surprised the hell out of me. And we're just talking Hawks. I figured we'd do more Hawks. Mitch, this is how long I said I was going to take of your morning. So interestingly, we're recording this on Mitch's Tuesday morning. It's released on my Tuesday morning. That's how this whole thing is going to break down. So speaking of time on this show, is actually very, very easy for the only time ever. He is at Ball Boys Fantasy on social. The YouTube page is at Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball. Make sure to check out all their incredible content. And if you're into AFL, you cover that too, right?
Yeah. We started doing that the last couple of years. So all the Aussies out there, or if you're an American that follow the Australian Football League, get involved. We'll be doing a much more when next year comes around in January. So for right now, it's all basketball.
Mitch, that was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Can we do it again soon, provided I'm not a dickhead and wait multiple seasons?
For sure, mate. Anytime you want me on, just let me know. I'll be keen.
That was Mitch Casey, my buddy. You know, interesting little backstory. The Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Show was briefly on the same network as my old show. We were together over at Hoop Ball, and now we've branched out into the universe, and they're kicking butt and taking names. They got like 12,000 YouTube subs, which is super awesome. I'm looking at their website right now while I'm talking to you guys. In fact, I wonder if I can just share that on screen so you guys can see what they're working on. How does that come out? Does that look okay? There you go. There's Mitch's YouTube page. Go check out their videos. There's the most recent content here. They got some sleepers and busts. If we look at videos, you can see the most recent stuff. Breakout players they dropped a couple days ago. They had a top 5 punt builds, mistakes you're making in fantasy drafts. You got some mocks. You got some first round selections. It's tough to be a one-man gang. It's tough. So anyway, check out Mitch's stuff. It's really awesome. Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball over on YouTube. Those were, again, Mitch's dudes. I don't know what you want to call them. Paul George, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, Isaiah Hartenstein, Amen Thompson, and Dyson Daniels going with a homer pick at the end, although I actually, not so secretly, very much like that pick. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Appreciate you guys taking the time. Again, like, rate, subscribe, all that important stuff to continue to grow the Old Man Squad network. I'm so appreciative. This run-up to the NBA season has been insane. We cleared 3,000 subs yesterday, 2 days ago, something like that, after being at 0 in the summer. Like, this is absolutely crazy. I'm blown away by the support. Whatever you guys can continue to do to share it, to spread the message of Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball, of the Old Man Squad Sports Network, which, again, open to everyone. You don't need to be an old man. That's the players I draft. It has nothing to do with the folks that are here on the podcast network. We are just people who like to do pods and like to mess around with social and like to bring you guys information And it's not all fantasy. We got football, we got baseball, we got basketball, we got all kinds of sweet stuff going on. And again, I'm thankful that you guys continue to check it out. Thanks once again to Mitch Casey for hopping on, carving out time on his Tuesday morning. My Monday late afternoon will get this show launched. It'll be everybody's Tuesday, I think, by the time it comes out. Have a great middle of your day. We'll be back with more stuff later on today, Tuesday, my Tuesday, here on Old Man Squad Sports Network. I forgot which one I was doing for a second. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. Better subscribe, though. See you later.